I was a graduate assistant working late hours in the history department. Kirkland Hall, one of the oldest buildings on campus, had this eerie, old-world charm. High ceilings, wooden staircases, and long hallways that creaked under your feet. The place had its fair share of ghost stories. The most famous one was about a woman in Victorian-era clothing, seen wandering the halls late at night. Some people claimed she was the spirit of a former professor's wife, who had died tragically in the 1800s. Others thought she was tied to the Great Fire that nearly destroyed the building in 1905. I always brushed those stories off, until the night I stayed late to finish grading papers. It was almost midnight, and I was alone on the second floor. The old wooden desk in my tiny office was covered in stacks of essays, and my only company was the dim, flickering overhead light. The campus outside was silent, and the only sound was the occasional ticking of the antique wall clock. Then, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, unhurried. I assumed it was campus security doing a round. But when I stepped into the hallway to check, it was empty. I brushed it off and went back to work. A few minutes later, the footsteps returned. This time, they stopped right outside my office door. I held my breath, staring at the crack under the door. No shadow, no movement, just silence. Then, a faint tap. Someone, or something, was knocking. A chill crawled up my spine. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then yanked it open. No one was there. The hallway was completely empty. I stood there, my heart hammering, scanning up and down the corridor. The air felt heavier, like the temperature had dropped. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling. Maybe I was just overtired. I turned back to my desk, but as soon as I sat down, I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. My office had an old glass window that looked out into the hallway. As I turned, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A reflection. Not mine. A woman. She stood just outside my office, wearing a high-collared Victorian dress, her dark hair pinned up. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. I whipped around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I didn't stay to question it. I grabbed my things and got the hell out of there. But the worst part, that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, I was talking to another graduate assistant, Sarah. She worked in Kirkland Hall too, and when I casually mentioned the footsteps, her face went pale. "You heard them too?" she asked. I nodded, not wanting to admit what else I'd seen. Then she told me her story. A week earlier, she had been in one of the lecture halls late at night when she saw something strange. She had glanced up from her laptop and noticed a woman standing near the back of the room, wearing an old-fashioned black dress. At first, Sarah thought it was just another staff member, but when she blinked, the woman was gone. She packed up and left immediately, refusing to stay late again. We looked at each other, unspoken fear between us. Whatever was in Kirkland Hall it wasn't just an old legend. That night, I did some research. I found an old photograph from the 1890s, faculty and staff members of Vanderbilt. And there, in the back row, was a woman wearing the same high-collared dress I had seen in the reflection. No one knew exactly who she was. Some speculated she had been a professor's wife who passed away unexpectedly. Others believed she had died in the 1905 fire, forever bound to the university. I don't know what I believe, but I do know one thing. She's still there, watching, waiting. And if you ever find yourself alone in Kirkland Hall late at night, listen carefully. You might hear the footsteps too. It happened in the fall of 2019. I lived in an off-campus apartment near ASU with two roommates, Ben and Ryan. The place was nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, old carpet, and a sliding glass door that led to a tiny balcony. It was a little run down, but it was cheap, and for a couple of college guys, that was all that mattered. The weird stuff started happening a few weeks into the semester. One night, I woke up feeling watched. I couldn't explain it, but the room felt different, like the air was heavier. I glanced at my door, which was always slightly open, and I swear, for a split second, I saw something move in the darkness. A shadow, tall, still, right outside my room. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. But when I turned on my lamp and looked again, the hallway was empty. I convinced myself it was my imagination and went back to sleep. But then, it happened again. A week later, I woke up at exactly 3 a.m., feeling that same oppressive heaviness. This time, I kept my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. Right next to my bed. I forced myself to stay still, every muscle in my body tense. My mind raced. Was it one of my roommates? A break-in? I didn't want to move. I didn't want to see what was standing over me. After what felt like an eternity, the air in the room seemed to lighten. The presence, whatever it was, felt like it was gone. I opened my eyes and looked around. Nothing. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I asked my roommates if either of them had been up around 3 a.m. Both of them swore they hadn't left their rooms. Ben even joked that I was probably just having sleep paralysis. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew I wasn't dreaming. Then, Ryan mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "I've been waking up in the middle of the night too," he said. "I keep feeling like someone's standing in my doorway, just watching me." He laughed it off, but I could tell he was freaked out, and things only got worse from there. One night, Ben woke up to find his bedroom door, something he always kept shut, wide open. He swore he had locked it before bed. Another night, Ryan's TV turned on by itself at full volume at exactly 3 a.m. But the worst night, that was mine. I had been up late studying, finally crashing around 2:30 a.m. I remember checking my phone, rolling over, and shutting my eyes. Then, I felt it. A weight on my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen, and my eyes darted around the room in terror. That's when I saw it. In the corner of my room, near the closet, stood a figure. Tall, completely black. No features, just a solid humanoid shadow. And it was watching me. Every instinct told me to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. It just stood there, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. Then it started moving, slowly, toward me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My chest felt like it was being crushed. And just when I thought I was going to pass out, it vanished. The weight lifted. My body lurched upright, gasping for breath. I scrambled to turn on the light, my hands shaking. My room was empty, but I wasn't alone. I knew that now. I barely slept after that. I started leaving my lights on at night, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched never went away. One night, after another round of unexplained noises, we had enough. We did some research and found out something chilling. Shadow figures, especially ones seen watching people sleep, were common in sleep paralysis cases, but there were also reports of people experiencing them in waking life, especially in places where something tragic had happened. And then we found it. Years ago, in the early 2000s, there was a student who had died in the very apartment complex we were living in. A suspected suicide. Some said he was depressed. Others believed something else had driven him to it. We couldn't confirm if it was our exact unit, but it didn't matter. We knew something was there, and it was watching us. By the end of the semester, all three of us broke our lease early. We packed up and left, splitting the cost just to get the hell out. I don't know if the next tenants ever experienced anything. I never went back to find out, but I still have nightmares. Time, pulling all-nighters regularly. Widener was my go-to spot, especially the basement levels, where it was quieter. The library has a reputation, stories about strange shadows, whispered voices, even the ghost of Harry Widener himself. I always brush those off as urban legends. One night, I was working late on a research paper. It was past midnight, and the place was nearly empty. I was on the lower level, deep in the stacks, surrounded by towering bookshelves. The fluorescent lights flickered every so often, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper. I'd been sitting at a small wooden table, lost in my work, when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, steady, coming from the aisle behind me. I turned my head, expecting to see another student, but no one was there. I brushed it off, figuring my tired mind was playing tricks on me, and went back to typing. But then, a book fell. Not just any book. A massive, leather-bound volume from the top shelf. It landed with a loud thud a few feet from me. I stood up, my pulse quickening. There was no way that book could have fallen on its own. It had been tucked deep into the shelf. I took a few cautious steps forward, peering down the dimly lit aisle. That's when I saw it. A shadow. Not cast on the floor. Not cast on the wall. A standing shadow. It was at the end of the aisle, tall and unmoving. It had no features, no definition. Just a pure black form standing between the bookshelves. I froze. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then it shifted. Not in a normal way. Not like someone stepping forward. It just glided. I spun around and bolted, knocking over my chair as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main floor, heart pounding, breath ragged. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe exhaustion. But then, the next night, I saw it again. I had convinced myself to return, mostly because I had a deadline and needed the resources at Widener. I chose a different section, far from where I'd seen the figure. Around 1 a.m., I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head. Nothing. I shook it off, went back to reading. Then, a few minutes later, I saw it again. A shadow. Not on the wall, not on the floor, but standing, watching. This time, I felt the temperature drop. The air around me became dense, suffocating. My ears started ringing, and then the books started moving, not falling, shifting, like something unseen was running its fingers along the spines, one by one. I heard the unmistakable sound of whispering, but not a normal whisper. It was layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, too faint to understand. I grabbed my things and sprinted out of the basement, up the stairs, past the eerily silent desks and reading areas. I didn't stop until I was outside, gulping in the crisp night air. I swore I wouldn't go back. But the worst part, that wasn't the last time I saw it. A week later, I was in a different part of the library, on the 3rd floor, during the day this time. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, and there were other students around. I finally felt safe. But then, I made the mistake of looking up. At the far end of the long aisle, half hidden behind a shelf, was the shadowy figure, watching, even in daylight. That was the last time I studied at Widener. I finished the semester using other libraries, And after graduation, I never went back. I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was Harry Widener's ghost. Maybe it was something older. Something that had been lurking in the stacks for decades.